Thank you. I'm now going to introduce very briefly Alan Neville, who's going to talk to you about young women navigating discourses of marriage and education in the Dinka community in South Sudan. I want to say welcome to people who are online as well. And I'm just going to slip into the background and let you take. I wonder if you should turn that light off.
I think it's probably a good idea. Somebody get the switch there. And make it.
Oh, the other one. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, over to you, Alan. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was a brief introduction.
You want more?
Fine. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Great to have you with us, and great to have all of you who are joining us online. And it's really, really lovely to be here. I understand those of you who have been with us have come from 3 hours of Foucault. We've all been there. This should be like a support group, really. Anyway, I'm speaking to you today about, this is my PhD topic. So it's young women navigating discourses of marriage and education in South Sudan. My name is Father Alan Neville. I'm a missionary of the Sacred Heart Catholic priest, and I live and work in Rumbek in South Sudan. When I'm there, I work in a school for girls. So we've got 385 girls in boarding school. I'm sure we can probably share this with you afterwards if you wanted to say the, you know. And I'm also the principal of the local Catholic university. We've got just over 100 students there now. So it's great for me to be with you. Let's see now. Okay, just to give you an overview of what we want to do today. As with all of us, when we're doing presentations, we always try to force too much into our presentation. But I'm going to just give you an overview of what we're going to do. So we're going to look at context, some of the key themes. We'll look at the research methodology, we'll look at research questions, a bit of the research methods, and then we go into analysis. So at this stage, I'm 2 years in. God willing, I have 1 more year to go. God willing. If you look at Barbara and Marie, they're thinking, no, I don't think so. But the idea is 1 more year to go. I have finished my data collection. I have done my coding. And now I'm at the stage when I'm submitting my first chapter of analysis. So this is an idea maybe for yourselves in future when you're doing your PhDs, just to give you an insight into what's involved. Okay. So first off, context. I suppose my own positionality in that context. I'm aware I'm an Irish Catholic missionary priest working and living in East Africa. And so very aware of, as I'm doing this, I'm carrying out this piece of research, I meant to say, Barbara Mairead will agree with me here, Irish people, we speak very quickly. So if I am speaking too quickly, just say, slow down. Oh, is that okay? Yes. Very good. So just being aware of the context, we want to carry out this research. A lot of the research that's carried out about in South Sudan is done very much from a deficit model. So it's looking really at all of the problems. And when you look at the reports, it very strongly comes from a problematized view of what the country is like. And I don't want to do that. There's issues that need to be addressed. But the research that I'm doing, the approach that I'm taking, it really is looking at centering the participants in this research. So my approach is it's a decolonial indigenous feminist methodology. Oh, sorry, Barbara, I've moved on my computer. Murray, you've moved on. There we are. And what I wanted to do was to celebrate the culture that we have. I also love history. I'm a huge history nerd. I absolutely love history. And if you go to the British Museum, you'll find tucked away in a small corridor this space here. And it's quite an interesting space. Anybody notice anything? Anything about it that you notice? It has a nose. It has a nose, that's true.
Egyptian, South Sudan.
Well, it's not South Sudanese. It's actually, it's a small space, and it would have, it's the space of King Taharqa. He was one of the 680 BC. He was a pharaoh, but he was a Kushite pharaoh coming from North Sudan. So he was an African pharaoh. It tends to get covered over quite a lot, or maybe not covered over, but skipped over. But it's a really interesting thing because the Kushite kings, when their empire fell, eventually their people moved south, and they became what we know today as a lot of the Nalak tribes, specifically the Dinka of South Sudan. So the idea here is that the people I'm working with can trace their ancestry back to one of the most important civilizations in the history of humanity. There's a great tradition there. And so in the work I'm doing, I want to make sure that I honor that. The other thing, as I said, is we've got the quote from Chinua Achebe. Is anyone from? From?
Things fall apart.
Things fall apart, yeah. But we have people from Nigeria? Yeah. So, and I think this is a really important quote, and those of you who have read Chinua Achebe will appreciate the importance of this, that we really need to be hearing other stories and other perspectives. So here, until lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And so the purpose of this research is really about listening. It's about trying to understand, and it's about trying to explore the issues that we are addressing. So just to give you Marie, sorry, we can move on to the next one. This is South Sudan. And if you hit the button again, please, Marie. This is Rumbek. This is where I live. So I'm in the center of South Sudan. I'm there for about 4 years now at this stage. Just to give you a bit of background, this is, as you know, the newest country in the world. It got its independence in 2011. Now, great pub quiz question. Your students, you go to pub quizzes? No, the pub, I don't know where that is. I have never been there. A great pub quiz question is, what country has a south but does not have a north?
South Sudan.
Sudan. That's a great pub quiz question next time you're setting them up. So, South Sudan, roughly population is about 12 million people, surrounded by Kenya, Uganda, Congo, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, and at the moment, a little bit in the news, Sudan itself. Like I said, it's a new country. In that country, the Dinka, the people I'm studying, they are the largest tribe. They're about 35 to 40%. There hasn't been a proper census since until 2008, when it was Southern Sudan. So a lot of these figures are guesstimates. Just to give you an idea, I was speaking to Eve earlier, size of the country is about the size of Portugal and Spain put together. So it's a pretty big country. It's a challenge to get around. It's a great country, lovely people, but outside of Juba, this is our capital here, there's only about 1,000 kilometers of tarmac road. The rest, you're just driving on a dirt road. When it comes to something like religion, because that's always a topic I'm interested in, again, there's no accurate figures, but you're looking at 35% Catholic, 17% Anglican, and who else do we have? There's evangelical Protestants at 12% and Muslims at 8%. Next slide, please. This is a short history. So, vote in favor of independence in January 2011. July 2011, Independence Day. December 2013, the Civil War broke out. I'll just speak about that very briefly in a moment. Lots of interventions to try and, but it's complicated. 2018, that's when they managed to actually bring it to, if not to finish it, just to kind of dampen it down. But between those years, 400,000 people died in the fighting in the South Sudanese Civil War. Riek Machar was one of the 5 vice presidents. That's what they did. If there was a group that was powerful enough, they were kind of folded into the existing government. So at the moment, we have 5 vice presidents in this country, each of them representing quite different needs. 2022, President Kiir postponed national elections, and then 2024, he's just proposed them again. They were meant to happen at the end of this year, but there's an awful lot of groundwork that needs to take place before the elections can run. Let's see. There we go. Now, with the Civil War, very often when you look at a lot of certainly Western media, they jump on the ethnic stuff very, very quickly. You know, it's sort of their go-to. But actually, when you study the different dynamics within the conflict, it really was elites who were mobilizing groups of people. So it wasn't so much a problem between the different ethnic groupings. It really was people in power looking to stay in power and also to get a larger share of the pie. Now, where we are at the moment, things are still quite tense, but it's peaceful, thanks be to God, by and large. There are certainly areas of South Sudan that would be quite violent, it would be a lot of insecurity. Where we are in Rumbek at the moment is relatively okay, but that was after quite some years of insecurity ourselves. Now, just to give you an idea, again, I'm sure Marie has spoken to you a lot about UN statistics. Would I be right?
A little bit.
A little bit. But to give you a sense of where we are in the United Nations Gender Development Index, the GDI, out of 193 countries, we sit at 192nd place. So this is, for example, things like access to healthcare for women, also access to education. So if I'm right, the average expected years of schooling for a boy is 5.7. For a girl, for example, it's 4.5. That's basically what they're expected to do, if even that. But there's a problem, because the schools are not, the primary schools certainly are not great. There's up to 120 students in one class. And since this time last year, the teachers, the nurses, the police, they haven't been paid. So the teachers aren't turning up. So if you can imagine, they may have a certain number of expected years of education, but the teacher's probably not there. Because to be fair to them, they have to go and grow food in order to feed their family, because they're not getting paid. We'll move to the next slide. Thank you. So these are some of the key issues that we're looking at. The photographs I have here, they're all taken, I'm using them all with permission. They're coming from the school or from the university. So early forced marriage, this is the term that's used most often. So the definition that we have for that from the UN is any formal marriage or informal union between a child under 18 and an adult or another child. And early forced marriage is the one that the UN uses most often. So when we're looking at, for example, language like this, the definition can be slightly problematic, because who's setting the definitions? How many South Sudanese people are sitting in the offices in New York, in the UN offices, making these declarations? And so it's important to question it. It's important to understand who is speaking and on whose behalf they are speaking as well. So a little bit of Foucault. Just you thought 3 hours was not long enough. You're probably at this stage probably know more about Foucault than I do. So some of the writers, what they're doing is they're using Foucault's thought to address this issue. And one of them is a guy called Horry. And he looks at Foucault's thesis of knowledge, reproducing power relations with regards to the hegemonic discourse around the legitimation of age of child marriage and the notion of consent. And the drive to accept are imposed from Western governments and international government organizations to say, this is it, this is the definition you must accept, and well, your opinion is not really necessary. You get a lot of this. Have you done Spivak yet? You will, you're going to love her. Her writing is, how would you describe her writing?
Let you describe it.
It's wonderful, but it's not straightforward. If you thought Foucault was challenging, wait, you get to see that. You are going to be pulling out whatever's left of your hair. But really, she's fantastic. But she speaks very much exactly about this issue, about as part of her analysis of post-colonial critique. And she speaks about groups coming in and saying, this is what is acceptable, this is what is okay, this is what you must follow. And as you do so, you are now becoming more civilized. You are now the good society. So the factors that we need to consider in relation to early forced marriage, well, there's tradition. This has been part of the tradition of South Sudan for quite some time, as long as they say it's part of their, now it's interesting, the group I'm working with, the language is not written, it's only spoken. So the spoken word is something that's cherished. So when I say it goes back as far as living memory, that's from the transmission of the spoken word. So they would say, for as long as that has happened, they have lived in a polygamous culture. So it's one man with many wives. Speed okay? Yeah, we're doing all right? Good, thank you. Economics, one of the big issues that we're facing is bride price. So when a girl is married, the family into which she marries must pay the girl's family a bride price. So initially, this was understood as kind of a show of respect, a demonstration of gratitude. But it's really become quite commodified now, and the cost of bride price has gone through the roof. And so the whole family on the man's side have to gather together to pay this bride price, which is in the form of cows. Within Dinka society, cows are sacred. I mean, in a way that I think we will struggle to understand here in the West. So, for example, when I was there and I was trying to learn the Dinka language, not easy, they had 31 names for bulls and another 31 names for cows, based purely on their colour. And so each man and woman will be given the name of a cow. It's part of the tradition. And when you arrive in the culture, like I arrived in the culture, after about a year or so, the women get together and decide whether you're okay or not okay. And if you're okay, they'll give you the name. They'll actually give you a name from the local tribe. So the name they've given me is, I'm called Nian McCarr, which is a bull with this kind of colouring. But you need to understand that this notion of bride price is hugely significant, both symbolically in a sacred way, but also in an economic way. So, for example, a cow generally, if it's a good cow, it's maybe 2 or 3 years old, can be sold for about $400. And that's huge money there, because the South Sudanese pound is going through a kind of flux at the moment, and the inflation rate since last December is about 420%. So it's very difficult to manage the local currency, whereas the cow is basically the equivalent of the credit card. You know, it will always hold its value, and it's accepted everywhere. All right, and let's see. So marriage among the Dinka, it's a very patriarchal society, very much so, with overt and covert rules and values that are used to control women, especially around the issue of marriage. The marriage is arranged by the paternal uncle. Sometimes the man himself doesn't get much say. The idea here is it's a collectivist society. So when we live in the West, those of you who have come from outside of the West, I don't know if you've noticed this, we're radically individualist. It's my way. What is right for me is right. Whereas in the Dinka society, it's very much the need of the community, is the need of the clan comes before your own personal needs. And so when marriage is arranged, very often the guy doesn't get much of a choice. The woman doesn't get much of a choice at all. So she, for her family, receives a bride price to compensate them for the loss of the girl and to repay the uncles who gave the cows to enable her father to marry. So it's sort of kind of a reverse pyramid scheme. So this, the uncles on the man's side, they pay the cows to allow this man to pay the bride price to marry this woman. But then, when they have the first girl, she is traditionally married off quite soon, and her bride price is used to pay back everyone who's contributed to the cows. And so there's kind of a pressure on families that when they have a girl, they will need to marry her off quite soon because everyone else is looking for cows because they want to get married as well. Does that make sense?
Just repeat that again.
No problem. So what will happen is, I want to get married, so all of my uncles will give me cows, so I can give to, let's say I'm marrying you, okay? I'm marrying you, so all of my uncles get together, and they will pay your family the bride price for you to marry me. Then when we have children, beautiful girl, we must marry her off quickly, because I need to get the cows for her to pay all of them. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of pressure put on them. And even if they don't want to marry off their daughters, it's very difficult to stand against that. So that is a big challenge. It's also important to remember that, thank you. It's also important to remember that when they're married, again, it's not two individuals who are married, it's two families who are coming together. And that strengthens the clan, and that's very important. And that's been a huge thing. For them, they will say, and I'm inclined to believe them too, this has really helped them through difficult times. And these people have been through incredibly difficult times. And so it's this form of solidarity that has enabled them to survive, where in other circumstances, I don't know how they would have managed. Okay. So this is a quote from one of the reports. Our lives are structured around cows, marriages, and children. Cows give you marriage, marriage gives you children, and therefore, the women say, they are trapped in this vicious circle. Okay. Next slide, please. So this feminist critique, this decolonial indigenous feminist critique, looks at the unequal nature of power relations and the dynamics that occur within them. And they're used to undermine the self-determination of the women. So we've got a quote here from Asa Dubé. She argues that women in colonized spaces not only suffer the yoke of colonial oppression, but also endure the burden of two patriarchal systems imposed on them. So they've got that legacy of colonialism, but also they've got their own patriarchal system, and then you've got the women who are there kind of stuck in the middle, And they're really trying to cope with this double oppression. Now, you also need to remember, have you done Mohanty yet? She's fantastic. You've done Mohanty, good. Barbara Loughlin had to do. We need to be very careful because, like, I'm just conscious. We talk about the West, and I'm thinking, well, the West is massive, you know. But the same is true of when we speak about Africa, or even we speak about East Africa. South Sudan has 64 different tribes. Of that tribe, the Dinka are the largest, but within that tribe, there's lots of different sub-tribes. And when they speak to each other, very often they won't understand each other. And so we need to bear in mind that the notion of a culture, it's not a monolith. And Mohanty, who's really great, you're going to love reading her. She speaks of the unconscious Western bias where the average third world woman leads an essentially truncated life based on her feminine gender, read sexually constrained, and being third world, read ignorant, poor, and uneducated. Let's see where we are. Tradition-bound, domestic, family-orientated, victimized, while her Western counterpart is assumed to be educated, modern, and autonomous. And so she's really critiquing this, and certainly from the experience I've had there, it's absolutely true. When we are looking and we are studying these issues, we need to bear in mind that there isn't an East African woman, insofar as we say that there isn't a Western woman. It's a lot more atomized, and as we approach the issue, we need to be able to do so with a sense of discernment. Smith then, gender refers, she says, this is coming now from the decolonial feminist perspective. You'll be getting all of this soon, you're going to love it. Gender refers not just to the roles of women and how the roles are constituted, but to the roles of men and the relationships between them. Very often we speak about gender, that's another word for woman. And so Smith is challenging this very much so. Ideas around gender difference of what can it mean for society can similarly be tracked back to the fragmented artifacts and representations of Western culture and to different and differentiated traditions of knowledge. True to a certain extent, even some of the writers, I remember, Mairead, you sent me one that was speaking about the imposition of gender binaries with the age of colonization. I'll be honest with you, I don't necessarily agree with that myself. I think those gender binaries existed long before and perhaps were cemented under colonial times. But certainly from my experience within the Dinka tradition, the gender binary that is there is drawn not from a colonial expression, but actually it's been part of their society, again, as they would say, for as long as living memory has been there. We might move to the next one. So Dinka culture is highly patriarchal, and the gender norms place men in the center, the loci of power. And this is absolutely true. We're going to see this in the analysis. Oh, we better move further. These norms seek to subordinate women and inculcate beliefs and behaviors in boys and men that perpetuate violent masculinities. So it's really the men are encouraged to be strong, to be dominant, to be the ones who are expected to speak. Okay, we're going to need to move on a little bit quicker. Let's move on to the research questions, if you wouldn't mind, please. That is that book. So the research questions that I'm looking at, what are the different discourses that frame young women's lives within the Dinka community? How do young women in the Dinka community navigate complementary and contradictory discourses of marriage and education? And how do they understand the emergence and role that education is playing in creating a new identity? Next slide, please. We need to copy this on to the next one. Yeah, this comes back to the earlier point I was just one before that. Sorry, please, Marie. Okay, it's just I really want to emphasize this point that the approach of this research, when you meet these young women, you know, they're extraordinary. Now, you don't want to kind of make them heroes either, because when you've got 385 girls in a school and you're doing a school assembly and they're having a bad Monday morning, trust me, everybody feels it, you know. They are well able to express when they are not happy. But I think the approach here, as we see with Medway, I think is really important. This methodology seeks to delineate those concerns that are peculiar to the African situation. Again, African situation, adjust that as you will. For my case, it's the situation of these young women in the Dinka tribe in South Sudan and Catholic education. while questioning features of traditional African cultures without denigrating them and understanding that these might be viewed differently by different classes of women. So again, we've got classes and other, it can't just be gender. We need other things when we're looking at our analysis to understand how these different dynamics, well, how they work. Okay, so this is what we did, or this is what I did with the team who was there. The approach was 10 focus groups made up of 8 young women in Catholic education, of 8 young women each in Catholic education. Thanks, Barrett. Thanks, Mary. There were 6 secondary school groups, 2 groups of interns. Interns are the girls we have in the school. So when they finish secondary school, they can apply for internship. And what will happen with internship is if they do 2 years in the school working in the clinic or the secondary school or the primary school, then they get a full scholarship to go to Nairobi. And Nairobi is seen as, when it comes to the standard of education, within Africa, I would say South Africa, I would say Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, Cairo, they're the kind of the big universities. Would that be fair to say? Am I missing? Ghana? Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like everyone wants to go to Nairobi. That is, I think within the Eastern African situation, Nairobi is the university. They're the universities people aspire to go to. So if they do 2 years, they go to, that's the interns, and then university students. So these are the university students in the Catholic University where I'm the principal. I had one group of students who were married and one group of students who were not married. All of the students who were married through an arranged marriage where they didn't have a choice. We also then had 4 semi-structured key informant interviews with local leaders. That was the idea there, to get a deeper insight into the tradition that informs the practices around education and marriage. And then we had 8 oral history interviews, 2 secondary, 2 interns, a university students, and 3 university graduates. So these are Dinka women who have gone to Nairobi, they've done their studies and they've come back. So the idea here with this research, with the focus groups, this was to get the breadth of experience. What's happening now? And then with the oral history, the idea there was to get some sense of the story over time, starting from the beginning, and how do they understand their experience of education and marriage within their society? Does that make sense? And then the key informant interviews were there maybe to provide a bit more depth and a bit more context for the study. Okay. You can skip that one. Yeah, just a small quote from Smith here. I just think it's great. As a researcher coming from the outside, so Linda Smith is an incredible writer, but she speaks very much and she's very critical of people coming from outside the culture to carry out research within that culture. And the word that she used, I just think it's so vivid, is that open cast mining approach to research. To seek, to take, and to destroy are absolutely unacceptable. And so research needs to be respectful, reciprocal, genuine relationships are essential. So in this research, it has been an experience that has been iterative. So I'm kind of going back and I'm speaking with people all the time. And it's been an experience of co-construction. So as I've developed, for example, the research tools, the focus group questions, the oral history, I've spoken with people there and I've said, listen, how do you see this? What do you think of it? Is there something I'm missing? Is there something I should leave out? Is there something I'm not recognizing? And so really the approach there is that it's done in as close as possible to the form of a partnership. It's not completely a partnership because the dynamic is not equal, but that's the drive. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, good. The 3 chapters. This is the university. As you can see, it's just like Sussex, except you guys have a ceiling. But we got our funding approved last week now, so we're going to redo the whole place. Everyone's really excited. So the 3 chapters reflect the 3 research questions that I've asked. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the three chapters quickly, and I'm going to come back and look at the first chapter. That's as far as I've gotten so far. Okay, so this is a preview of coming events, and then we'll look at question number 1 in a little bit more depth. So it's tradition with a different lens. The Dinka ontology and epistemology in indigenous society, in some indigenous societies, they're very much together. And for the Dinka, it's an ontology and epistemology called Chieng. We'll look at that a bit later on, but this is the tradition that I'm speaking about. And Chieng, the closest you can come to, and I'm kind of slow to use the example, but would be the Southern African concept of Ubuntu. But I just think that gets used an awful lot and it ends up on mugs, and I think it kind of loses its meaning. So CIE is somewhat the closest example I can think of that may help to illustrate it. So how do the women see this? So what is the discourse around identity for women? Are they traditional discourse? Are they traditional? Are they good girls? Or are they spoiled? We're going to come back to that. Do they have no voice? We're going to come back to that for definite. Are they able to articulate? Or are they expected to be quiet and compliant? And then the capital cap, this is where a lot of the traditional education would have taken place. Or have they gone for state education? It is a Western education model, but at the moment it's operated by the government. The main medium of education in South Sudan is English. This has been the choice of the government. There's lots of really interesting discussions you can have around it, but we've got minimum 64 different languages within the country. And so this is the one they've chosen for ease. Let's see. We look at issues like family life, gendered identity, the asymmetrical relationship, nature of the relationships, the relationship that exists between the cattle camp. So that's basically they keep their cows in a particular area, and what would have happened traditionally was all the young people would have gone there, and their education was how do you take care of the animals. These are you can't underestimate how important cattle are to the culture. So that was the school. Learning how to be a Dinka, learning how to live as a Dinka in a highly regulative and highly policed fashion. The roles that are there, so we should see not roles, identities that are there. The identities that are formed there are highly policed. We'll come back to that in a second. Then we looked at, in this chapter, the expectations of the family and the community. It's in a time of flux at the moment because education is still a relatively new thing. The girls who are currently going to university will be the first girls who are going to the university in their family. So it's still a very new experience. And that has benefits, but it also has significant challenges too. It looks at marriage and what is the purpose of marriage? We live in a society in Rumbek that believes in, what's the word? Immortality is achieved through having many children. And so the more children you have, the more well-named you're known. This is for the men, obviously, not the women. The more children you have, the more celebrated you are, the stronger your clan. So that's really the focus for marriage. Whereas for women, they're trapped within, maybe trapped is too strong a word, although, within a discourse that sees their identity reduced to three things: to childbirth, to home, and to the husband. So as to mother, as to homemaker, and as to wife. This is the truncated identity that women occupy within this space. Then marriage, just to give you, what do we have?
More than half an hour, so you've got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes, no problem. So like the tradition that we would have, well, actually, I'll come back to this when we look at the chapter. Yes, we'll look at all of this when we come back to the chapter. So we can take the next slide.
Sorry, I'm interested. What is ghost marriage then?
Ghost marriage, we'll come back to that. Yeah, it is very interesting. So this is the second chapter. So we moved on to how do these young women see their culture? And they see it, they do see it positively. There's so much of their culture that they cherish and they respect, but there are certain aspects they feel before they've never been allowed to really express a voice or opinion, and now they would like that to change. And to do that is facing a great deal of resistance. So we're looking at that here. How do young women in Dinka society, Dinka community, resolve the complementary and contradictory discourses of education and marriage? So that will open with, well, how do they understand education? How do they see the education that they've experienced? Evolving identities, things have changed. For example, during the conflict, as happens everywhere, when there's a conflict, women are forced to adopt roles within society that previously were occupied exclusively by men. And so what happened after the Civil, during the Wars of Independence, was 50 years of fighting in order to get independence, and yet the Civil War, there was opportunities for women to expand into different areas where before that would have been prohibited. These particularly would be areas that would express control and power over resources like money and control of the family. Perceptions of girls, how do they see the girls who are outside, particularly village girls, looking then particularly at marriage and the resistance to commodification. For the girls, they'd be one of the strong discourses is commodification. We're going to see this when we look at the first chapter, but they see themselves reduced ignored, and understood as something that is traded and not something that is respected or esteemed. How they see marriage themselves, what is their own opinions on marriage? And from the research I'm doing at the moment, all of them, without exception, are expecting to be married. But there's a desire for them to be not in a polygamous relationship, nor to be in a relationship where they have no reproductive control. Moving along, let's see then the expectations. Sorry, just back for 1 second. Now, if the problem is if they delay marriage by going to university, there's a problem. The cows that would come to that family, and that's a huge investment of capital, for want of a better word, that comes from bride price, that's delayed. And as they get older, it's reduced because they're not able to produce as many children as they would have before. They're starting late. And so for a family, that's a big issue. And it can be a big issue when it comes to capacity to pay for things like healthcare, education, cows for other marriages. So there's huge resistance. And so what may happen there is the family may withdraw members from school. They may marry, for example, if you and I are getting married. Sorry, what's your first name?
And we're not getting married.
We're not getting married. But if you were in school and we were arranging a marriage and you refuse, what often happens is they'll arrange a marriage with your next sister down. So does that make sense? So it's going to happen anyway. They will really force this through. So that's the marriage of sister. The person can be ostracized. Now remember, we're a communal society. And so here, it's not unusual in the West that people estranged from their families, but their identity is so intimately tied with family. And then there's violence. I don't think we need to go into that there, but the violence that the women can be subjected to if they refuse marriage is really quite extreme. Okay, next slide. So then third chapter is subversion and assimilation. How do they understand these emerging roles that education is playing in Dinka society? And so as things are changing, I think, Marie, this is something you and I've discussed before, societies are constantly changing and evolving, whether because of restrictions or in spite of restrictions. It's just the nature of societies. So creation of new identities, fusions of different worlds. And have you done that by yet? You guys are really going to enjoy all this stuff. The notion of hybridity, because these young women, they want to occupy both worlds. They're very happy with the notion of being Dinka and the wonderful tradition that they have, but they also are aware that they wish to also occupy a space where there's greater self-determination, greater control over where they are going, like who they are going to marry, where they are going to work, and it's not going to be in the village for the rest of their lives. They want to work somewhere else. They also look for greater self-determination, a monogamous relationship. The consequences, though, so you've got increased independence, later marriage, greater reproductive control, but community perspective. So to be a woman in South Sudan is generally, once you've had your menarche, once you've had your first menstruation, you have now passed from childhood to womanhood. And what they would say is the moment that happens, the clock starts ticking. And so generally, traditionally, about 3 years after that, if you're not married, they'll say, why is this old lady not married? 3 years after, yeah. You know, why is she staying at home? What is she doing? What is she bringing into the family? Nothing. And so then the pressure comes for her to get married. The other problem is, for the women coming back, if this is, like I said, we're only seeing the first generation of women coming back. When they get back, they've done a degree. They're maybe about 24 years old. They're already seen as grandmothers. They're too old to get married. How did this woman give birth? She's like 24. She's 25. This is too old. And the word that they use, the market is closed. There was no husband for them. They are too old. So that's a challenge. So this new framing, recreation of old discourses, recommodification. So what's happening now is people are realizing these young women, as they come back, they can earn money from work in NGOs. And so people are including their education in the bride price. This is how the culture is adapted. And so now they say, we eat with the pen and we eat with the cow. So the bride price of girls who are educated is now going up. Okay, we're moving on just to the analysis and then we come to the end. Just a few quotes. This is how women see Chiang. This is the ontology. This is the underlying ontology and epistemology of the society. Again, perfect. great reverence and respect for it, but
Sorry.
that's,
Oh, jeez.
there's a little pause there, like there's a little page in, it's like industrial, like, perfect, yeah. Leave that, Barbara, it's Barbara. Why am I calling you Barbara all
I
the
don't
time?
know.
Sorry, Marie.
Okay. I'm kidding.
Apologies, Barbara. I know you're there too, apologies too. Okay, so,
Me, but
men have the right to choose which wife they needed, but women never had the choice to choose which husband they'd get married to. Men had to choose the time they will come home. Women, the opposite was true. So the negatives, they are always gone to the women, and the positives always go to the men. This is how unfair it was. So this is how they see the ontology and epistemology that informs their way of life. Speaking here about the lack of a voice, that's what there's a real strong feeling that the voice, it hasn't even been taken from them. It was never given to them in the first place. So since in this society here, there was only one who really has the voice of a girl, and it is a man. Over all of the people, it is a man. Yeah. So there's this taking of voice, this disenfranchisement. Next one. But there's positives. When they grow up in Dinka society, a child is for the community, the wife is for the community. Remember, it's not two individuals, it's two families coming together. So we are in that love, united upbringing whereby all the people in the community are your siblings and we are living in loving harmony. So it's not unusual to have 3 or 4 wives living in the same compound with all of their children, their half brothers and half sisters. That's quite typical. Okay, next slide. Growing up in a polygamous family, we can move on. We kind of cover that one. So, construction of gender identities. We touched on this already, like people can make a decision. Mostly it's the father of that family because they believe the women does not have a right to make a choice for the daughter. Because they can believe that when they get married to the wife, she's also part of the property of that house. She is not supposed to talk. She is not having the right. She is supposed to, her work, as I mentioned earlier, is to give birth and to take care. And so here we've got that discourse of commodification coming again. She's property. You know, now there's a respect and there's a see, but it's very clear who is in charge. Patriarchal expectations. This is from one of the girls who's in school. The father was dead set against it. The mother brought the girl to school, and the father had the mother imprisoned because you can do that. And she was in prison, I think, for 2 weeks because she brought the girl to school and he wasn't in favor. My dad is not so much into girl-child education. To him, you were supposed to grow old, get married, and he gets the cows. So whether you pass or fail, he's fine. He doesn't really care. So their idea is, it's very much for the men there, for a lot, not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly that's a growing group, but traditionally the girl is there to get married, to bring cows, to strengthen the family. Okay. Yes, if you just dress nice, if you wear your nice clothes, they will say you're spoiled. This is one of the strong discourses. The difference between are you good, are you spoiled? Are you following the traditional ways, or are you following these other ways that you see either from education or from social media? And that's really strong. It's a way of, I think, controlling, reducing the identities of women to this binary. And if you fall afoul of this, if you end up spoiled, for example, God forbid, if a girl gets pregnant outside of marriage and she's in school or something like that, and she gets pregnant, what they will do very often is she's married at a reduced price, or what will happen is she will be married to an old man to show the other girls what will happen to them if they do the same. And she's also obviously pulled from school as well. The boy who got her pregnant, he might get beaten up. Usually what will happen is in that situation, they'll both get themselves arrested as quickly as possible. So they'll go to the police, they'll get themselves arrested, but ultimately the boy will have to pay compensation to the family for the girl's loss of value, and she'll get married at a reduced price, or else get married to another big man. Okay? Booking. Okay, I'll finish very quickly.
2 minutes.
Huh?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. I won't need as long as 2 minutes. And so part of the tradition there is what will happen is at a young age, sometimes as young as 3, but usually about 7 or 8, a family will book a girl. So what they'll do is they'll pay a down payment of cows for this girl to say, this is obviously, I look at her, she's a very fine girl, she's quite beautiful. So the markers is dark skin, gap in the tooth, tall, these are seeing things as very, very desirable. And so they'll say, we'll book this girl for my son or myself in a few years. They'll pay a down payment to the cows, and then they'll put a bangle on the girl to symbolize that she is now booked. And some of the girls have their own personal experience of this. So they're telling me education has spoiled you. She doesn't want to get married. And everything you don't understand. So I said, everyone has a right to a choice. You cannot marry someone you don't even know. What will happen generally is that once the girl has her first menstruation, that's when the guy turns up, and then the remaining down payment is paid, and the process begins for marriage. And that usually takes not immediately, but a few years afterwards. Menses, this is when they have their menstruation. This is, again, everything here with this research approach is how they understand it and how they see it. So when I come there, you know, in our society, we believe that when the girl receives her menses, she is something ready to be eaten. So if you've read any of bell hooks, I think it's a very vivid image, no? Again, it speaks of a lack of a little bit, no space for aspirations on their part, and again, that issue of commodification on the other. Next slide, please. Bride price, we've covered.
No,
Just that line there, I think is great.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. So this is the bride price. She's been married off to pay for the cows given to her father by her uncles. I've been born and I don't even know what happened and the things that happened before I was born. So I don't take it as something fair, but it's their culture, it's their culture. I'm paying a debt. There's a loan I have to pay, and it's not fair. This is from the girls. So they're paying the debt for the father and the uncles. Yep. Marriage. I'm going to go one more slide after that. Okay, again, this is back to those traditional roles. She is not having rights. She is supposed to, her work is to give birth and to take care of them. Last slide. And then reproductive rights. So in a society, it's procreational immortality was the word I was trying to remember. The more children you have, the more celebrated your name becomes, the stronger your family becomes. So the notion of any sort of reproductive rights, or God forbid contraception, is hugely taboo. And the last line here, I think, is great. I tell them I only need 3 kids. 2 kids. They'd be like, when did you become an American? So this is the context in which these women are operating. These are some of the key themes that we have. And so this is the bones of most of the quotes I've shared here, the bones of most of the chapter on analysis. Last one. And this is you now. This is one of our kids in primary school. Drawing an apple is really quite tiring. Okay, I've really shot through lots of stuff and I've skipped over plenty, but I think now it's Sussex bus time.
Yeah, it is. Thanks so much, Alan.
Yep.
Okay, let's have 5 minutes. See if you can raise and articulate phrase questions for Alan, and we'll come back to the plenary for that.
Yeah, perfect.
People online as well, if you put them on in the chat, I'll get to them.
That is not a flattering camera.
That's all the base rates. Actually, it's my fault.
So I think.
Based on your investigation, your advice.
How do you fix? Oh, these are 6 or 5, these are jokes. It's fine.
There's some people that speak that, we have to talk about some of those. We don't have to be but there's some, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're your key. They're your key, right? This is programming is just not.
No, it's about. No, I'm taking it again for that.
What do you do for that?
And then. Around.
Okay. Are you, that's from the previous class.
Yeah. They just have sound. Yeah,
Yeah.
If somebody from this room who went to the local college that side of the community, not really.
Yes. How did you find it? I know we're running towards, we're always running towards the end. How did you find it?
yeah, when I was looking at this, I was in concentrating.
You were teaching.
Yeah, I was in there. And, yeah, I think there's going to be some. Those lines, basically, and how they lead each other.
Yeah, really, they're not gonna start. Once they're working with that. Which is great, but I'm gonna do. We've got a lot of work to get back to graduation event this week. So, yeah, everything else to catch up on. But, it is, yeah. This was like almost like a mini semester.
Okay, let's have your questions. Okay, let's see what last question. Darren, are you ready?
Yeah, totally.
Questions?
Well, sort of.
So there was a question here. So the question is something like, how does your positionality as a Catholic priest, how does it influence your research? Given that we have this, I mean, we noticed this, that you are a Catholic priest. You went to some country in Africa, but you only talk to Catholic girls.
No, most of the girls aren't Catholic.
Most of the girls, but you said when you were.
No, the 35%, sorry, finish your point and we'll come back to it. Yeah.
All right, so the question, the issue was this, that you already talking to some people who have been westernized with Western like values to Catholicism, and you are asking them what they think about their culture, their tradition. So how did you navigate this?
Okay, well, we take a couple of
Yes,
questions.
please.
I think that might, instead of just getting, is that okay? We'll take one or two and then answer all of this.
Any other questions? Namaste.
How the changing gender roles lead to conflicts in South Sudan, like for example, after the people, most of the women had to take up home management responsibilities, and I'm wondering how has that changed the practices, as it at least maybe reduced the issue of forced marriages among the Dinka community.
And I must answer about the ghost marriage too.
Yeah.
Remember, you asked about ghost marriage, yeah. Okay,
And then in relation to that, the issue of, you say, they look at it, at least that is imperative that is for educated girls now, like the more educated they put in the dowry goes up. But then also I working with the Dinka community, know that they also look at, they have that aspect of saying an educated woman is quite spoiled, she's not going to respect her husband like one who is not educated. So how do this dynamics work in that community?
okay, so they could, okay, I think so.
Okay, so one there,
And ghost marriage.
and this one.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you so much for your presentation. We'd like to know what is the goal of the research and what is the contribution of you to the research.
What's my contribution to
Yeah.
research?
What
Oh.
would you like to change or
What
the
I would like-
purpose of the research?
What's the purpose of the research? Okay, good. Let's start with your question. So yeah, I mean, I think when you adopt a decolonial point of view, you like, in many respects, if this was a pantomime, I'd be sort of a pantomime villain. Irish Catholic priest man in Central Africa, you know. And I think that's why there's a real focus on looking at that indigenous decolonial research perspective, which incorporates very strongly working with local people. So to make sure that being aware of my own positionality is key, but also at the same time working very closely with the people there to, when I'm doing my research, say, okay, well, what is this like? Am I capturing this? Am I respectfully reflecting the different dynamics that are there? Is it going to be perfect? No. I think even Smith would say people even coming back to their own cultures and doing research with their own cultures is problematic as well. Anytime you carry out research, it's going to be problematic. You're going to take it from a particular perspective. It's never going to be perfect, but I think as long as you are dialogical and as long as you are as aware as you possibly can be, that's hugely helpful. Insofar as to being in a Catholic school, sorry, I didn't express that there was only a limited amount of time. But actually most of the kids in the school are not Catholic. They send the daughters there because it's a boarding school. And for the families, they quite like the idea of education, but with the boarding school, there's less chance that a girl is going to get spoiled because it's a boarding school and there are no boys in the school. So most of the kids who are there are not Catholic. There's a Catholic ethos for definite. School is run by a woman, which within the culture is quite countercultural in itself. So yeah, there's certainly a clash on some level of values and standards. When it comes to curriculum, it's the curriculum of the government of South Sudan. That's what we follow. Yeah, does that address? Stick around, it's a good question, and stick around afterwards and feel free to grill me, no problem. Let's see. The other question then was around the recommodification of girls, and yeah, you see, there's kind of a bit of a tension there. So if, for example, you leave secondary school and you get a job working in an NGO, particularly an international NGO, you will have 75 times the earning capacity of a civil servant. Because the NGOs, and it makes sense, the NGOs will pay a local person the same as they will pay an expat for the same work. And this is right and just, yes. The only problem is they're paying European wages, which are massive, and they are only providing short-term contracts. And so what happens in that situation is everybody who can get a job at an NGO gets a job at an NGO, and the family are thrilled and there's loads of money coming in, but it's a short-term contract that 6 months later, she's out. And all of your very best people who should be your teachers, your nurses, your doctors, your civil servants, the only people working in those jobs are those who can't get jobs in the NGO. Now, so they're earning massive money. So in that respect, that's hugely esteemed. So you'll have one group who will see the value of this. You'll have another group who will say, why is she working outside of the home? So it's not a binary, but it's a tension between the two. Is that fair enough? Your other question was, sorry? Gender identities, don't say gender roles. I don't know, I've been through this. I keep on saying gender roles and I get my hand smacked. I won't say by who. So changing gender identity is that door, yes and no, but in some respects, I think it's like the experience of World War II in England and America. Women were occupying roles used by men. The men came back, and the women, it was thanks very much, and we're here now. It's okay. So to a certain extent, it's a little bit of that. The men have retaken those roles that were there before. To another extent, the men have kind of taken a step back and allowed the women to occupy those roles, but they still maintain control. Ghost marriage. Oh, sorry. What's the purpose of the research? Again, it sort of comes back to what you're talking about. It's not me looking to, well, it is me looking to see how they understand the differing discourses between education and marriage. Because like I said, for example, the university graduates, they're the first university graduates to go to Kenya and to come back. And now they're reinserting themselves back into their traditional society. And it's not easy. It's really not easy. Their earning capacity has increased massively. But people are saying, she's like 25. What's she good for? She can't, and so there's even a tension. Some of them would have said that they are waiting to see if they can get pregnant before they'll be married off because they're worried they are too old. So that's a real challenge that there. So for myself, what I'm looking to understand is as these women go through this experience, I'm conscious of the challenges that they face, the difficulties they are going to encounter, the self-determination that they have to push it. Like, I don't need to go around and chase anyone to do study. I get up at 5:30 in the morning and go for a walk. They're already outside studying. Because the choice that they have in front of them is, now this is a bit of a binary, no, we don't like binaries, but the choice is they will either get an education and be in a situation where they are working, that they will have the resources to exercise some self-determination, so to create for themselves a new identity, or they will be forced to occupy mother, housekeeper, wife. And so what I'm looking at is how they negotiate and how they understand these evolving identities. What do they think of them? How do they experience them? And then how do they see their society reacting to them? Does that make sense? Ghost marriage. So what will happen is, let's say I have a younger brother. My younger brother, he is 5 years of age and he dies. Now, what we will do is, the practice is, I will find a wife to marry the brother. Instead, I will father the children with this woman, but they will not be my children, they will be his children. So for a family line to stop like that is considered something absolutely terrible. They must have children. It can also happen as well if a girl dies. They can actually marry a wife for the girl and have children in her name. That's rarer. So what will happen is the girl marries a ghost. So I will father the child of the girl, but they are not my children. And what happens increasingly is I'm not responsible for them, financially or economically or anything like that. That's the wife's job. I pay the cows for her to work.
Do you then have the ability to now have your own children now that are not the ghosts?
Well, remember, it's a polygamous society, so I can have many wives as I can afford. Yes.
So I feel like in comparison, my question is going to be a lot less deep. What about the boys' perspectives? So you played an all-girls school earlier.
Yeah.
But surely you work with the
That's full stop. I also work in the boys' school.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my question is that you said that the women are undesirable at 25.
They're considered very old.
So
25.
what about, when do the boys suddenly become men? And at what age are the men, like what's the age difference between the men and women usually in the marriages?
It can be, it's, you see, the challenge is, first off, the boys go through a rite of initiation. So for the Dinka, they will go to the cattle camp, they will live there, they will learn to take care of cows, they will learn how to fight and protect. And then when they are ready for initiation, age varies, but usually about 15 years of age, they go through a rite of initiation. Part of the rite of initiation is scarification. So they will have, the leader of the cattle camp, they will draw a blade around the head, usually I think about 7 times, and the boy cannot flinch, cry out, or make any sound. So if you can see there, the construction of identity of, you know, to be brave, to be strong, to not show emotion, to all this. And so once they've gone through that, they are now considered men. Insofar as when they're allowed to get married, you've got the cows. Some of like you'd have traditional generals now from before, it's less so now. Economics is proving to be the best source of reproductive control. Before, you could have many cows. You had some guys now, they were celebrated, they'd have 100 wives. If they have the cows, and they can have the wives. Age really is. And what can happen as well is if the guy is too old, he can have the son from another marriage father children with the woman, so he can have more children in his name. Is that okay?
Okay, let's take a couple of questions. There's one there, there's one there. Let's take those two.
There was a question about what things have you had to like unlearn and learn other than obviously the culture in itself. Like,
Yep.
Specifically your PhDs, like what things have you had to pivot, what things have you had to scrap and change as you progress?
Well, I think a lot of it comes back, and I find it when you're coming in very much from the Western perspective, we have very strong lines on things. For example, when we talk about the definition of early forced marriage, it's anyone under 18. And over there, it's like, well, what's 18? A lot of the people, when I'm doing the inscription for the university, we have a lot of dates, the first of the first, because people don't know when they were born. And we use this thing when they're coming into primary school. If you can do this, yeah, you know this. Now you're old enough to come to primary school. Still do that. We still do that, yeah. Yeah. If you do that, that means you're primary school age. So what I've had to unlearn is this very much Western sort of empirical positive way of thinking, positivist way of thinking. And that's a really tough thing because, as my supervisor will tell you, I'm very much like that. You know, when I'm doing my stuff, I like things. And to commit to that situation and then be able to kind of really question and practice the beliefs I arrive in with, particularly around kind of traditional practice. So things like the scarification. If you say that to somebody over here, they'll go, oh my God, oh. Whereas over there, to be able to go through an experience like that is to be deemed worthy of incredible respect. And now the practice is evolving and changing. And people are opting now. Generally, you take the traditional route and the educational route. There's very rarely you'll get somebody who's gone through both. But questioning myself around that and have to unlearn the assumptions I have around practices. You'll get all of this now when you start doing SCIE. Research, incredibly confusing, which is really good. Around when you arrive in from a Western background and you're there and you're trying to, well, this is good. There's a great article by Beswick before when the English were there on the Afro-Egyptian condominium. They arrived in and there was a situation where women, the bride price was spears. And they came in and what they did was they said, no, this isn't right, so let's get rid of it. And like from the Western point of view, this makes perfect sense. These women are commodified. It caused anarchy within the tribe and real breakdown and total chaos. They arrived in and were imposing. They hadn't unlearned the assumptions that they had, and they actually really made the population they were looking to protect, the women in this group, far more vulnerable. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, good.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple of questions now.
Okay.
So let's have them articulated and come back. Yes.
I have 2 questions. The first question is, you mentioned that
One question.
so
We're positivists in that respect. Stick around afterwards and grill me, yeah? But I just want to make sure everyone gets it.
okay, this is the one.
Okay.
Are you sure? The question I wanted to ask is that is there any space for peer, are there any clear
No, oh,
identities?
no.
Collectively.
Sorry, yeah, okay.
Are they clear identities within the Dinka community?
Yeah.
Or is that not something you explore?
Okay, that's good.
Can you speak to divorce, or would that be something that's considered or common?
Yeah, so, the question is still around, functionality.
Yeah.
And the binaries. So I've heard you use the word educated and traditional as if they are,
That's coming from the girls.
coming from them.
Yeah.
So that means that they already have been programmed to believe that they are, some of the traditional values are not up to the standard. So they say maybe going to school.
Collecting questions.
Sorry, yeah.
So you might see education in quotes as, being in school, being in your schools. The schools are set up by the missionaries, and like people that are having alternative form of education might be seen as maybe inferior, so they're called traditional, they're local, and so how are you navigating these binaries and helping them understand? I know they had ways like mentioning the boys going to learn hunting, how to take care of cows, which is more economically beneficial. Like so that boy was painting an apple. I'm sure there's not an apple tree in his life, but he has been given an apple to paint in the classroom. So how do you handle this?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Okay,
That's
that's
great.
great. I'll come back to you, boss.
Okay, so queer identity, no, absolutely not. It is very, in that respect, the gender identities that operate there are very binary. And for someone, even like, because I asked that question a few times, and it's been like, what? It's, remember, the focus is to build a community, to build a clan by having children, something like, queer, gay or lesbian relationship would be frowned on, and the person would get, for want of a better word, crushed.
So is it that they don't exist at all, or?
Well, I'm sure they exist. I'm sure they exist,
But,
but within the culture, I mean, they exist everywhere, they exist everywhere. But within that culture, an expression of it would be massively problematic, because remember, if you're coming from a culture that has procreation and mortality, what's a gay relationship? Is it procreation and mortality? Yeah, and that's the big issue. Like all of the sanctions that come in are sanctions that have resulted in a frustration of procreation. She's gotten pregnant out of marriage or something like that. And the sanctions are quite strict. So for something like that, yeah, I've asked that a few times, and the impression I've had from the people I've spoken to is if they were to try to express it and develop that way, life would be extremely difficult for them. I mean, when I say perhaps fatally, yeah. Divorce is tricky because remember, let's say we're getting married now. Wife number 2. Is that okay? Wife number 2. Divorce is, so what happens now is I pay the cows. You take the cows are in my uncle's and they are spread out. Now I've decided I want to divorce you. It's very rare because if I divorce you, the cows have to come back. They've already been given away in other marriages, and they've also had calves. You see how complicated this is now getting? So really the one reason we can have for divorce, one of the main reasons is infertility on your part, not mine. Sorry, I've been very blunt here now. Very difficult because you've got to say to your family, all those cows that you got for me, I want you to give them back. And how do you think that conversation is going to go? Now I'm being sorry, but it's possible, but it's extremely difficult, and there's great resistance around it. And generally, when it comes to divorce, it would be the man to call for it, but he is aware that the challenges that are involved are massive. So it's resistant. Okay. Back to positionality. Yeah, I mean, you're right, a lot of the stuff, like I said, we are using it's all the curriculum that we follow is the curriculum of the government of South Sudan and the Ministry of Education and Higher Studies, I think it is. So in relation to the stuff we use in the classroom, that's the stuff that we follow. In relation to positionality, again, that's an ongoing conversation for me to have with myself and the people that I'm working with and the research that I carry out. That's why the focus is on an iterative approach. So even now, for example, when I'm doing the analysis, I give it to my supervisors, but I also speak to the people that have been part of the research to make sure that I'm reflecting adequately, not obviously imperfectly, the work that I'm doing. To be there, we had an interesting question before. One of the sisters, Orla, was over in America, and they were talking to her about the use of English as a medium of communication. Now, that's the common medium of communication there. And there was a strong critique kind of saying, well, people should be using their indigenous languages. And the point she made, and I'm inclined to agree with it as well, is the language of the world is English. And it is our hope that these young people are going to be leaders in their country, and we want them in a room where they're going to be able to speak for themselves and argue for themselves and fight for themselves. So is it perfect? I would say no. And I think that's why there's a need for continuous reflection on my side. But again, yeah.
Okay, we'll take another round.
Yeah.
So thanks for, I thought a good presentation, it's really thoughtful and I really appreciate it, so thank you. I wanted to again ask something about positionality, which is, so you are, a Catholic missionary.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that religion is really important for you.
I hope so.
I hope so, yeah.
Some days, I've got to be honest with you, there are days, yeah.
So the question is basically like, what, if any, role do you think your religion has played in your epistemology and your methodology, like in organizing how you approach your research?
Okay. Well, as a
Alan,
yeah.
Okay, my question is that, is there any part of the country that this kind of system is not happening? Because I'm talking from Nigeria perspective. I know you said they don't have north part of the country.
They don't have?
I know you said that they don't have north part of the country. But in Nigeria, this kind of a system is still happening in the part of the northern part of the Nigeria.
Yeah.
So is there any part of the country in the South Sudan that this kind of system is not happening? It's not even happening.
The bride prize and all that. Yeah, of course, yeah.
And oh,
gee.
This is very gentle.
That's okay, yeah.
No, thank you very much. I mean, great, you highlighted all the complexities and ambiguities, really interesting. I just want to pick up on something you said in your presentation.
Sure.
About the ways the colonial past has come together with traditional understandings of gender and sexuality. Yeah. And you kind of challenged you kind of suggested that in the traditional it had forever been that kind of heterosexual framing. Binary.
Yeah.
And then your response to a question, which said, well, of course, those queer identities exist everywhere. Yeah.
Sure.
So there is something there about the ways regulation is being imposed through these different lenses, and your recognition that this is a more global kind of thing. So it was a little bit to question you, the very strong assertion that no, it has forever been.
Okay, I will be clear on that, but that's okay. Yeah. Thank you.
That's
okay.
the last.
Let's go back to the
Perspective.
Yeah.
So I mean, listen, no matter who you are, when you're going into your research perspective, you are going to carry assumptions and beliefs yourself. Even if you were studying your own ethnic group, doesn't matter. The fact that you've even come through an experience like Sussex is going to change and shape you. So from the Christian perspective, or the Catholic perspective, I suppose for me, it's what informs the work I do is an estimation of all people, regardless of background, regardless of whatever, that we are children of God. And that for me is everyone is precious, everyone is equal, everyone is to be respected, and everyone is to be loved. Sometimes it's tough to love everybody, you know. But my faith is a huge part of, and it's kind of what's driven a lot of the research. I can't park it. I mean, we've spoken, but when it comes to positionality, I need to acknowledge it. There's no point saying, well, you know, I'm aware. And that's why, particularly, I suppose, when we're speaking about kind of the women there that have taken on education, I think we need to give them more credit. They are very critical. We've also worked with them to kind of foster a critical faculty and to kind of say, I'm here and I'm saying this, but what do you think? Well, how do you think I'm wrong? So That for me is the Catholic perspective. The people who are there, I am there to serve. It's no one's there under duress. Everyone is there to as they wish. We do have things like catechesis, where if someone wishes, they can come and they can become Catholic, but that's after school and it's optional. They come if they want, and if they don't want to, no one is making them go. And I say that they won't allow it. It'd be great to meet some of them. Like you've seen a little bit of the photographs. Like the women that we have there are just dynamite. Not meant to make heroes out of them, but as good as. Other parts of the country, yes, definitely. So yeah, there would be, like I said, there's 64 different ethnic groups within South Sudan. Some operate the system like this. The Dinka is the one that's perhaps the most stringent and the most demanding, particularly in terms of the amount of cows that would be paid in bride price for a woman. And that can be quite high. In other cultures, it would be maybe 5 cows. In Dinka society, if you're a tall woman, you've got black gums, gap in your tooth, come from a good family, remember bringing together families, that could be like they paid 500 cows. Now remember, you're getting $500 a cow. But this is like, and someone goes, oh my God, that's a lot of money. But I would say within the culture, they don't think of it that way. It's never, the cows are only ever used for court cases because that's how payments are made, and for marriage. To sell a cow for something is considered, it's like in Ireland for us to sell land. We have this thing after our experience of 800 years of colonialism. We have that thing around, we want our, for us to, we were thrown off our land. And so in Ireland, for an Irish person to sell their land, it's like teaching a dog how to quack. Why would you? It makes no sense to us. Same thing with cows there. So they are only used for court cases, and if I have the cows, I'm getting married again. Barbara, yeah, that's true. But I suppose maybe what I was really reacting against is some of the stuff I was reading. It was like colonialism was brought in the gender binary. And I'm thinking, I wouldn't be convinced by that, because in many respects, under the colonial administration of the Afro, even before the Anglo-Egyptian condominium, there was a very strong sense of like man, woman, husband, wife, a very strong sense of binary. Like I was saying to it was Amanda. Yeah. Amanda. Are people who are there who are queer? Definitely. Are they keeping their heads down? Absolutely. So what I think is maybe it's both and, but this notion that English colonialism brought a gender binary to Africa, I don't buy. I wouldn't be convinced. This is really continued. I'm going to pay for that one. So someone else who hasn't spoken yet? Any other questions? Yeah.
Random question.
Random.
Yes.
Pisces. I'm a Pisces. And I love long walks on the beach.
So there was a hand raised there, but wasn't there?
Okay. I can read online.
There are, but they're not.
Okay, no problem. Sorry, Amanda, I interrupted you.
Since cow is so precious, I'm guessing that they don't eat beef a lot. Or I was just wondering.
You see, people we consider that like sacred time. So a wedding, funerals, initiation, and so like people will rarely eat meat. They can't afford it. A lot of people can't afford it. It's mainly things like rice and beans or the beans supernoiki or something like that. So it's you feel like cow is huge. Okay.
Okay, I think that's just to leave us all to say thank you very much. Very interesting. These guys are thinking about their research, lots of them. So the way that they're asking you questions of your positionality is very important to know, as well as the gender and sexual economy that you're talking about too. So let's say thank you very much.
Oh, if anyone has other questions and you want to pick me up a little bit more, no problem.
Thanks very much.
Sorry.